right, friends, I hope you're well. And I'm going to use two words in a phrase that pretty much sound like leprechaun sighting right now, which is today's video topic about Mars and the sign of Leo. So this video is going to apply to interpreting this transit coming up in April, third week of April of 2025. And I will come back to talk about this transit specifically. But today I want to talk about this placement in a sense that it applies to both our natal chart and what it just symbolically means, so that we can interpret it whether natally or via this transit. And honestly, in this video, I do not want to touch Mars in Cancer. I feel like I've been talking about Mars in Cancer for the entirety of my life now. It's just been so long that it's been there, it's been debilitated, and there's been a lot of struggle. So I'm just going to shift our focus into the next sign, which is actually a very happy sign for Mars. And you know, when Mars enters into Leo, it's not going to tiptoe in there like the way it had to do in the sign of Cancer, and it had to be so self-restrained. Mars in the sign of Leo is going into a fire sign, which is of its own element. It's going into the domain of the king as the commander. So Mars is becoming very, very powerful in the sign of Leo. Like that restraint that it had to show in the previous sign, now it has the full license to exert its will and its energy without censorship. So in many respects, right off the bat, just want to make it clear that Mars in the sign of Leo has a lot of resonance. And when we say a planet and a sign have a lot of resonance, we can't really give it a negative interpretive slant. That means they're working. The sign is supporting the planet to do what the planet wants to do. But you know, life doesn't just work on a raw interpretive level, like the way we interpret these symbolic notations and placements. A lot of times these very glorious placements come with certain kind of life challenges, because they're describing a certain kind of potential where we also have to be in charge. We have to have a certain kind of maturation. So while I'm going to talk about the greatness of Mars and the sign of Leo, I'm also going to talk about some psychological challenges that might be there, or the life lessons that it poses and how it wants us to perfect a certain domain or certain field or modality of life. So I will be talking about this throughout the video and not just its resonance. And we got to remember through this transit too, I mean, Mars is going to be opposing Pluto. So it's not straightforward in itself either. So understanding what the inherent benefits and challenges of Mars in the sign of Leo is just in its raw interpretation will really help us negotiate through these transits also. And as usual, look at where Leo is placed in your chart in terms of what house. So it's telling you something about Mars negotiating its symbolic meaning and its unfolding through the themes of that house and the people that pertain to it. And then sometimes there are certain houses in our chart where it's really about us. Like the first house is really about us. First house all the way to the fifth house, it's saying, again, a lot about our own personal sphere of life. And like the fourth house is our own internal sense of being. It includes the intimate aspect of our lives. So is Mars in Leo in that sector of the chart, or is it in the public sector where it's related to your work life, like 9th, 10th, and 11th house is more about the public, society, the outside world? Is it sitting in your 7th house? Because it could be saying not just something about you, but also something about your dynamic with your partner. And this is also where it's important to understand the challenges that comes from it, because when we're interacting with other people, yes, we have that Mars Leo quality, but we may also meet, let's say, partners in the 7th house who have that Mars and Leo quality. So we gotta learn how to negotiate with that, because we're talking about a lot of fire in that case, right? So look where the sign of Leo is sitting in your chart. This is a great part of how you will be interpreting this placement. And before charging into talking about this, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you guys like this video or the content of this channel, please do like, subscribe, and comment. Your comments mean a lot to me, and you know that. I write back essays to you, not just little comments of thank you. If you do comment, check out your comments. There's likely an answer there for you or a response. And if you are interested in my readings, courses, or just any kind of information or articles, go to my website at parisayazi.com. I'll put the link below in the description box. And without further ado, let's move along and talk about displacement. I just want to very quickly go over the fundamental rules of what we need to do when we are interpreting a planet in a sign. So the first thing we got to remember, as I already mentioned, the ruler of Leo is the sun. The elements of Leo, the sun and Mars, are all fire. So we always have to consider the elements, and we can see that there's resonance between all three factors here. And this is saying something about their alchemical nature. You know, both the elements here is telling us that this combination can become a catalyst for something. It's also about vision, inspiration, because what does fire do? It's light. It lights things up. There's a sense of power with it. And with that heat also comes a lot of passion. And the element of fire is also saying something about the dharmic nature of this combination, because fire generally represents that. And I've discussed Dharma in other videos. If you're interested, you can look at the video about the 4 goals of life, for example. But it's generally saying how we understand our sense of purpose and we act in alignment with that purpose. And there's a lot of integrity in the way that we act and move towards things. So the element of fire is bringing this, and there's such a great resonance in this combination. The ruling principle and the gender of Leo, Sun, and Mars are all male. And again, the Sun's mature masculinity is about reliability and stabilizing things. That's its sense of maturity. While Mars's masculine nature is about how inceptive it is and how it is able to initiate action. But they're both talking about the externalization, not that receptivity of the feminine planets. Another thing we have to take into consideration when we're assessing planets and signs, so because we know Leo belongs to the sun, is the ruler of Leo a friend to Mars? Yes. Sun is a great friend to Mars, and Mars is a great friend to Sun. So we know when Mars goes into Sun's sign, Mars is going to be very much supported in that sign. So Sun is going to make sure that whatever Mars needs, Mars gets. And lastly, we have to consider the orientation of the sign, and the sign of Leo is fixed. It's of the fixed nature, which is saying how the sun is going to support Mars. So it's going to give it the kind of support that it needs for Mars to have that the sustainability that it needs to do the Martian things that it needs to. Now, with the rules and the fundamentals out of the way, let's go to the core archetypal meaning of Mars in the sign. So everything that we talked about, we saw great resonance. So we can say Mars in Leo is talking about dignified power and motion. This is where the inceptive force of Mars is stabilized, dignified, and it's given a very good sense of direction by the fixed nature of the sign. You know, fire again brings that light element. So it's talking about awareness. It's talking about having a sense of vision. It's understanding our direction. Unlike the sign of Cancer, I said I wasn't going to say much about Cancer. So Mars that can, in other signs and in other places, can be very impulsive and just act before you think. Mars here, the way it's lit, it knows where it's moving to. In a lot of ways, the sign of Leo gives Mars a very clear inner mandate of what it needs to do and why it's doing it. So in a sense, it has a kind of a self-knowledge. And when Mars comes into the sign of Leo, we're not just talking about action. We're talking about the way that you act as part of your identity also. Because the sign of Leo and the sun both have a lot to do with that sense of self and the ego identity as well. So this gives Mars even a greater initiative or a greater reason to constantly be in a state of action. And they will demand respect for their sense of individuality, for example. And because there is resonance here, they don't do this in a very like gross kind of way. For example, they lead by example, or the way that they act, they want to have that identity, but because their action also has integrity in it. But if they can't be seen for this, or if they're not respected for this, or it's being undermined in some way, let's say their actions are being undermined, their sense of self also feels undermined. Another thing that you can see or interpret with Mars in Leo, you can call it, let's say, the noble will or nobility of will. And if we remember, when we go back, Sun represents mature masculinity, so does the sign of Leo, which is again talking about what it means to be responsible, reliable, stable, confident, and loyal. So when Mars comes into the sign of Leo, Mars gets the ability to channel its own masculine and energy, and it's a very active planet through this Leo quality. And one of the things that comes out of this, you get someone who's very passionate, for example, in a relationship. You know, when Mars is not the greatest planet for a relationship, but they will fight for that relationship at its best manifestation rather than fighting with the person to sever the ties. I know earlier I was saying that the fire element is related to Dharma. So it allows Mars to act in a upright kind of way. It expresses its own will in a noble way, not in a psychotic way, which Mars can when Mars is dysfunctional. So Mars is always aiming for the right action, or at least is striving for it. It's about protecting others. It's about demonstrating courage and leadership. And so when Mars, despite its individualistic nature, which can have a negative connotation, and especially when Mars is dysfunctional, Mars in Leo doesn't shy away from responsibilities and being disciplined. And it actually thrives when it's given a chance to lead by example. And you can see this with Mars in Leo because the individuals act boldly, bravely, decisively. So this is that sense of nobility that's coming out of Mars in the sign of Leo. I know I was talking about this with Sun in the Aries videos about how this is also related to Dharma. And I was explaining in that video, part of Dharma is to know what you're made of. And therefore, in accordance to that, you act in this life. That becomes your sense of purpose in life. So again, in the sign of Leo, when Mars is here, Mars is also acting in a similar manner with a sense of purpose. Like, for example, Mars here gives the will to act, while Leo ensures that this action is coming from a stable identity and it's infused with a sense of purpose and a sense of direction, which is very important, especially with a planet like Mars. It is a malefic after all. It needs to have a sense of direction, otherwise it can create a lot of chaos. We can also look at this in terms of having a disciplined kind of self-identity. It's coming from that fixed nature that's of the sign. It's coming from Mars's own quality, which has to do with discipline and willpower. And in this way, Mars's actions come to be in service of one's soul. So Mars here is using his action as a beacon of light rather than as a weapon. This is why Mars is dignified in the sign of Leo. It also has the will to shine, to assert itself, to enact its own truth. And it has the courage to be itself, which is so important. A lot of people shy away from being themselves and even coming close to touch that essence of themselves because of the conformity. But Mars, as an individualistic planet, when it's dignified, it has the courage to express itself as its true self, as true as it can get in any given moment. And it does this without being apologetic about it. So in this way, Mars is acting from a place of integrity in the sign of Leo. And when all the parts are integrated and the person can be very seamless in their action and their sense of being and how they perform and enact this, Mars and Leo can become the archetype of the hero. And the bravery of Mars in the sign of Leo is worth emulating. It does inspire. And that's because we can see its strength is authentic. It has a sense of integrity, and it comes from its own inner center, the center of its own being, and not from places of insecurity. Because you can see people who are very performative, who enact themselves, their sense of self, but is not coming from a secure place. Mars in Leo has great amount of security. So I'm gonna take a very, very short break and I'll be right back. All right, coffee at hand. I'm a happy camper now. At this point, I just want to talk about some of the astronomical significance between Mars and Leo too, just as a brief side note. So Leo obviously is a prominent zodiacal constellation. That's all the signs are referring to constellations along the ecliptic path where the sun, the moon, and all the planets are moving. There's a very cool app that I use. I can't remember the name of it, but I'll actually put it on the bottom of this. you can see this path and the rising of the planet and where they are. It's a very cool app. There are a number of them. I'll put the one that I use. It's actually very nice to track them this way and to have that kind of a visual. And the primary star in this constellation is called Regulus. So it's in the Alpha Leonis, and it really stands out, Regulus. So when Mars is traveling through Leo, when it gets to a certain degree, it looks like it's appearing, and it's a lion, right? That's what the shape of the constellation is. The king, the throne of the king, and the nakshatra system is Maghā, which is the throne, its symbolism. So it's like if Mars is moving through the heart of the lion. And this segment of the constellation are marked by 4 royal stars, which if you go back to any culture in its astronomy and astrology, from Egyptian time to the Persian, Indian, all of them, this is a very, very important constellation. Regulus in itself and these 4 stars across different cultures are related to royalty, kingship, nobility, and regal power. So when Mars is traveling through this constellation and it's getting to these 4 stars, Mars can be viewed as the guardian of the cosmic order. So Mars loses that recklessness that it can have in other places. All of that force and initiative that symbolically is associated to Mars. In Leo, it's invested with that power, but it's exerting it responsibly. As the commander of the army getting its commands from the king. You can look at it like that. So it's responsible fire, it's responsible energy and will. And we can look at Mars as like the primary top warrior standing in the center of the king's kingdom and protecting it. So there's that protective element to Mars and Leo too. Now let's shift our focus a little bit to look at the psychological factors related to Mars and Leo, because it's through this that we'll start to understand some of the life struggle and some of the life lessons that can come with this placement or this transit. And I didn't want to say this at the outset, but I personally have Mars in Leo, and I didn't want to sound like I'm tooting my own horn here, like Mars in Leo is so dignified, it's so powerful, it's so there are struggles that comes with this placement too. So I was like, okay, I'll mention my own experiences, and I have Mars and Leo when we get a little bit into the aspects where it does pose some challenges to us. It requires a particular kind of maturity to be able to express its potential. We're still talking about Mars, so we gotta live and learn how to utilize this energy properly. So for example, Mars in Leo is very much prone to equating its action to its sense of self-worth. Like the act of doing things, asserting oneself, initiating, being disciplined. They're not just functional matters of this placement. They're existentially tied to the native's notion of who I am. So this can become very problematic to always confuse the you of you with what you do. And I personally had this problem very much, to a point that, let's say the night before I made a schedule for myself for the next day, if I couldn't perform those actions the following day, my sense of who I was as a human being, what my capabilities were, how good I was or wasn't, was very much this feeling of how much I can do. And because Leo is so much related to our sense of self and that ego identity that comes with it, it's almost as if Mars constantly has to prove itself here through its actions, because that's what it's going to do in the sign of Leo. Another thing that this can do is that a person's sense of confidence is going to be constructed around their ability to express their strength, their courage, and how well that they can be self-reliant and self-directed. So confidence comes to be very much tied to these concepts and aspects. And then there can also be this feeling of needing to feel heroic or to be the hero in one's journey. I remember in my early teens, I came across the song by Frank Sinatra, I Did It My Way. And that song resonated with me so much so that it took me years to unpack what that was about. because there were some unhealthy components to that. And Mars and Leo people very much want to be the main character of their own story, the movers and the shakers. They don't just want to respond to the life demands, they want to command it. And these are good qualities if you have mastery over it and you can do it in a healthy way. Another thing, Mars in Leo has that sense of dignity for itself. And I would argue with any quality, when we have it deeply entrenched in ourselves, we also know how to give it to other people or be that way with other people, or to permit and make space for other people to come from that same place. So Mars and Leo people can do that. But there's also this instinctual gravitation towards this notion of respect. And here, respect, because we're talking about a dignified place, is not talking about domination. Like, you're going to respect me because you fear me, because this is a functional Mars. But Mars and Leo people want that respect because of their actions, and they're trying all the time and they're trying so hard. They want to be seen. They want their competency to be respected, for example, because they are trying to act from that code of honor, come from a place that's noble. So that respect is almost like a self-confirmation about their self-concept. But then again, we can see if we don't have a sense of maturity, we can expect other people to respect us when it is not earned. It's just, it can be a sense of entitlement. Like, you should just respect me because I'm me. Even though I'm violating you, you should respect me because I'm me. These are very immature ways of thinking. So a Mars and Leo person who has a sense of maturity understands the complexity of this idea, and it's not so black and white and split-minded about it. And with lack of maturity, being disrespected or being ignored, I mean, this is Mars in the king sign. You don't ignore the king. So when Mars is also here, any planet that's here, being ignored for that planet and how what its significations are, it's a hard pill to swallow. So this is Mars now. So we gotta remember Mars can be reactive. So the reaction of the native can be disproportional to what just happened to it. Again, this is showing a sense of immaturity. And one of the reasons for this is that fire element that's here in Mars and the sign of Leo, Mars doesn't come into relationship cold. Mars comes in hot. Mars comes in passionate. Mars is going to give you all that it's got. It's going to protect you. It's going to put its neck on the line for you. So when it meets the reaction of that as indifference, that's when it can take a turn. And this is where Mars in Leo gets a bad rep for being theatrical and dramatic suddenly. That anger is coming from this kind of a confrontation as one of the examples. Like, underneath that very confident exterior, the way Mars is in the sign of Leo, there is a desire to be affirmed. The sign of Leo in general has this. I don't care which planet's in it. Even though it's the king, it needs to be praised. And you sometimes have to ask yourself, why is the most powerful person the king? Or why does God, because the king is like the steward or the person who represents God, why did these factors historically across all culture need so much praise? So when Mars goes into Leo, any planet that goes into Leo is not exempt from this. But when Mars wants his praise, it's not superficial. Mars wants the praise for, I stuck my neck out for you. I protected you. I had the willingness to fight for you and I fought for you. Mars in Leo is going to be loyal. And Mars is not necessarily the most loyal planet. It's about cutting and severing things. It's not about sustainability of something. But when in Leo, just imagine how much is going against its own nature to have that sense of loyalty, to fight for it. And Mars, because it's an individualistic planet in the sign of Leo, it might even stand alone and singularly fight for someone or something. So it'll take all the weight of the responsibility and show immense amount of discipline. So again, when it's met with indifference or disrespect, this is where the theatrical thing can come out. And one of the cool things about Mars in Leo, it doesn't just want success. There's a lot of placements that want superficial success and praise. Mars is looking for meaningful victories in the sign of Leo. And it's a meaningful victory because of what I just explained, the things that it will do for that victory. there's a lot of sacrifices made in a lot of ways with Mars in Leo to get that victory, which again brings us back to when you don't have enough sense of maturity and when the recognition is not given or the person's just met with indifference, this person can either go to that theatrical thing. Another thing you will see with Leos in general, Mars or any other planet, massive amounts of withdrawal suddenly. So it's like this oscillation between overcompensation and withdrawal. And this is because with not getting the kind of acknowledgement that Mars in Leo person or any planet in Leo person who has an underdeveloped ego and a self-concept struggles to anchor themselves in their own strength and that sense of integrity and the personhood that they have. And that's because they don't yet understand why they're doing the things that they're doing. Why was I loyal for so long with this person who acted that way, who actually betrayed me, let's say? The Mars in Leo person can make this statement. Why did I do that? Not understanding that that was coming from their own inner mandates, their own inner compass, just because of the way they're configured, because they have this configuration in their chart as Mars in Leo. It's like you're just going to do that because that's what you're made of. That Dharma aspect, that's how you do things, and you actually don't need any praise for it. It's one of the best manifestation of Mars in Leo when it's mature. It doesn't need anyone's permission. It does what it does because that's what it feels its inner mandate is about, which is the beauty of this placement. So with maturity, there's a sense of integration. The psyche is able to integrate the will with purpose, passion, honor, and being okay with being visible or not visible, being praised or not being praised, because that's just who you are and that's what you do. And another thing about this placement, these individuals can, if everything's functional in the chart, they radiate leadership in a lot of instances. And that's not because they demand it or command it, like I'm your leader. It's because they embody a particular kind of strength, that code of honor, that integrity and that dignity. That's just there. It's something that inspires, and the element of fire inspires in general too. And we have so much fire here. So it becomes something inspirational. And for Mars and Leo people, one thing that they should always strive for is to have their actions aligned with their ideals. The element of fire, again, is talking about ideas and ideals. And it's this that reflects that inherent internal nobility that's within them. When these things are misaligned, we actually get a very hodgepodge, weird type of a person here. They are so theatrical that they almost feel ridiculous. So this is actually very important for the person to feel coherent and seamless in themselves. And when this is not there, you get to the lowest common denominator. Even though this is a dignified place, this is Mars and its best friend sign, because you can fall into ego-driven self-defense that never ends, performative dominance, aggression that's almost theatrical, and it can have a pride that becomes very rigid because of that fixed nature of Leo. Because there is a natural performative component to the sign of Leo, the person can become very consumed with performing and with maintaining a certain kind of an appearance through that performance. And this is one of the reasons why you see performers with Mars and Leo. And another thing that can go haywire here also with lack of maturity and very good self-knowledge and self-understanding is the inability to show vulnerability. They don't want to be perceived as weak. And I know this is something I've struggled with for a long time in my life. I had such a hard time asking anyone for help. It was just like that kind of vulnerability was just unbearable, but you live and learn. And one of the things that can happen when things go haywire with this placement is that internal sense of the self starts to turn against the self. It's going to inflame insecurity because the sign, it's about security. So whatever something is whenever a sign or a planet is symbolizing something, its dysfunction is the opposite component. That's when you know it's dysfunctional. So insecurity becomes a very prominent thing. And this is a very prominent thing for the sign of Leo. Whatever planets that you have in it, everyone always expects the sign of Leo to be super confident. Well, if you have some dysfunctionality or some immaturity in the sign of Leo, what you're actually going to get is a lot of insecurity. And how do they try to remedy this? By being over theatrical, over performative, overly strong, overly brave, overly heroic. Look at me, look at me. Like the very mechanism that's there to make Mars in the sign of Leo a hero, to protect others, it comes to use that to self-protect because of its own insecurities. I'm going to take a little short pause and come back to the pros and cons of Leo and Mars. I really do take a lot of breaks, but I don't like drinking on camera because when other people do that and then you hear the whole swallowing thing it's just not pleasant. I'll be right back. All right, to keep moving forward. And if, as usual, if you guys see thumbs up that turns into fireworks or I don't know, balloons, thumbs down, is just me being my usual Persian self, as I always say, using a lot of hand gesture, and then the camera's translating it as that. But I'm not intending to give an appropriate thumbs up or balloon when I'm talking about negative things. Okay, so we shall move on. Another thing with the sign of Leo and Mars has to do with passion and that fire element that's coming into play. It can indicate desire for strength, like inner strength. And this is not a bad thing. I mean, in life, we have to be strong. This placement is indicating someone who's strong, who's resilient in that way, especially because of the fixed nature of the sign. But if our identity gets tied to this notion of I gotta prove my strength all the time, it can start to attach itself with needing external validation, always needing an applause for what you're good at. You actually do see some Mars in Leo people who are fighting for the applause, putting a lot of their energy and their action towards that kind of an acknowledgement. And that kind of admiration is what they need externally to maintain that internal fire and passion, not understanding that fire and passion is just inherently there. They can actually, they have that strength even without it, but it's almost like an addiction. You just become addicted to it. That's what you always need. You're always performing to get attention. The sign of Leo in general can do this. And Mars, taking the significations of Mars into consideration, like I'm an individual. Like you have to see that and you have to acknowledge that and you have to applaud that. Look at my strength. Look at what I'm so good at, where these are the things that becomes problematic. And then this external orientation really distorts their inner compass, and they're born with a strong inner compass. So instead of authentic self-expression, they can start to just chase praise everywhere they go. And then the biggest danger here is that self-concept that's coming out of the sign of Leo and its ruler, the sun, is being conflated with like me getting admiration, for example, equates to my sense of self-worth. This is very problematic in life. So when the spotlight dims on them, they feel like they're internally dying. This is not a good thing. Like I have no motivation. I have no determination. I have no sense of purpose. Why am I doing this? Like Mars and Leo people have to realize that they've been given, it's like a gift. They have this inherent internal strength that it's within them. It's at the heart of them. It's in their heart. They don't need it externally. They just have to tap into themselves and that potential and that configuration that's inherently them. That's what they're made of. And then there's another factor too. So sign of Leo represents sovereignty, the king, someone who's in command. So is Mars. Mars is about commanding. It can be about leadership, same with the sign of Leo. So we're talking about power. This placement inherently has power within it. So it becomes very difficult for Mars and Leo people to confront their own powerlessness. And I don't care who you are. You can be the king of the world. Life will pose situations where you have to confront your own powerlessness. And it could be as benign as being sick, as getting old. These are the things that become difficult for displacement if they don't have their internal essence straight, and if they're not able to see it, if it hasn't become visible to them, if they don't have that sense of maturity. And we're all going to meet people, if we're not the king of the world, who have more authority than us. So the experience of not being in control and not being in a position of power can be very provoking for displacement. Having a sense of humility is very important, not to feel humiliated with displacement. And they got to understand that they are born leaders. And what do you do as a leader? You roll up your sleeve and you also put your hand in the mud and you do what you're commanding and how you're leading other people. These are some of the ways to humble ourselves in this life, if you're in a place of leadership and if you've been put in a position of power. And it's also about understanding that some of our life's greatest strength and our internal strength comes from surrender, adaptability, and knowing when not to fight. And these are hard things for Mars to do, especially in a fixed sign in the kingdom of the king. But these are lessons all of us human beings have to learn. And as I said, I don't care who you are, we're all going to confront such moments, and we have to be able to pivot. And this is a challenge for Mars and Leo people, but we live and learn. And taking that other thing about Leo that can become very performative, and it has to do with our self-concept, how we are in the heart of ourself. Regulus, the heart of the lion, and the sun being the ruler, and the sun has everything to do with the self. Mars and Leo people, again, before maturity, can become very attached to their roles, such as the leader, the protector, the warrior, even as a creative person, because they generally will have some need for self-expression in the sign of Leo, any planet in the sign of Leo. So for Mars and Leo people, this is also part of their inner mandate, to be strong, to be a warrior, to be a leader, to be a strong performer. Let's say you're an actor, actress, and that fixed nature of the sign can bring a kind of a rigidity about these roles. And if we're not willing participants to always evolve and shed that old identity, we got a problem on our hand. And Mars and Leo people will experience this over and over in life because it's trying to teach them that roles in life change. And we know that. I mean, we go from a stage of childhood, there are so many roles in that, to adulthood, there are so many roles embedded in that, to being in our advanced ages, that requires other kinds of roles. And that's what I was saying earlier, aging is something that can become very difficult for Mars and Leo people. And it's also challenging their strength. They pick roles that's strong, where they have to be decisive and do a lot of Martian things. And with age, that strength, if it's related to your physicality, is going to challenge you, right? And Mars is very physical. So Mars and Leo people should identify with the roles enough to be honorable, to be dignified, and to serve it in the best possible manner, to bring that sense of loyalty, let's say, to it. But there also has to be room to grow out of it and to grow into something else. So now moving to some other points. There are so many points. Even when I was writing the outline, I was like, oh my God, what do I bring up? What do I leave out? And I didn't want to just talk about how Mars and Leo is great. I don't do this for any sign because we human, in a symbolic, raw symbolic interpretation, great placement with a lot of resonance. But as these imperfect beings, and we're imperfect because we're always becoming, even if we perfect ourselves within ourselves, the external world is changing all the time. So we're always rendered partial and imperfect. We're coming to negotiate with some unknown factor all the time. So I want to describe these challenges that are also there. And one of the good qualities, great quality in Mars and Leo is that they can uplift other people. Because of that fire element, it can be very inspirational. They're empowered and they have this capacity to empower other people, to transmit. You can easily set things on fire. You just need fire, something that can catch that fire, and it's like everything's on fire. But again, Mars and Leo people have to learn that they can ignite other people, but the strength and the power that comes with this placement should also come with responsibility so that they don't impose their will and their strength on other people. You can get kind of like dictator kind of feel out of this placement too, when there's no maturity or when there's not enough self-knowledge. It has to be a leadership that inspires and not a leadership that can control, because of the fixed nature of the sign and because of the malefic nature of Mars. You can get power dynamics here where it's about control. So the instinct to lead is in this placement, but it has to move beyond just the phrase of I must lead. It has to become I must lead to strengthen and bring out the best in other people. That's what a good leader does. That's what a king is supposed to do for their kingdom. That's what the commander of the king should be doing. So the focus, that inherent power in this placement, needs to have the right gaze with power, control, leadership, authority, things of this nature. As I was mentioning earlier, when it goes haywire, it's seeking for applaud for its self-performance. Mars being the individual. in this very performative sign. So Mars in Leo people have this responsibility to act from a truthful place and to do it because that's inherently who they are and it's not for recognition. So these natives, they have to learn. We have to learn the difference between genuine purpose from performative for the purpose of something. Actions have to reflect internal values, even if they're uncelebrated, even if they go unnoticed. So Mars and Leo people have to discern how to do the right things rather than doing what's right to be recognized. This is very important. This is an important point for people who have any kind of a placement in the sign of Leo, but Mars especially, because I was saying earlier too, the element of fire brings a lot of Dharma, the concept of Dharma into this, being purposeful, being right, being upright. And Mars and Leo people are endowed with the position of what we could call stewardship of something. They are meant to guard and to protect. So in a lot of ways, this placement has to show a lot of responsibility. Can't really call it care because that feminine principle is so missing in this combination. But responsibility is a good word. Like if someone's proud of their strength, they have to become the steward of that strength to show great responsibility for it and to use that gift in the service of people, to offer protection, to inspire, to create stability and reliability, and not to use it as a badge of superiority, for example, because this placement can. Again, many planets in Leo can. And when we take the fixed nature of Leo, we're talking about contained fire, where this is not Mars's natural forte. Mars wants to spread the fire. So cultivating stillness within this very fiery combination becomes something very important. And this is where the overdramatic, just crazy performative aspects comes out of this sign because the person doesn't know how to be still inside that fire. So that means you have to learn how to hold that fire, endure the heat, the passion, the ambition that can come out of this place, the need to lead, the need to inspire, the need to act. So the lesson here is not to just constantly feel our sense of power by forward motion and forward propulsion by setting things on fire, but in being very poised. And this is a quality of Mars and Leo people when they have mastery over. They are poised within themselves, within an environment, within different roles. That's their strength. That power is coming from this poised presence. And when they can be stilled and centered, remember the sun represents the center of being. The heart is at the center of our being. Regulus, the heart of the lion. So when we're centered in ourselves, our actions carry a lot more weight. They are way more impactful, and Mars wants to be impactful. And there's way less volatility when this fire is controlled. This need for action, constant action is controlled. It's directed, it's purposeful. And that's what this combination wants. And another thing we have to remember, Mars is very competitive, like psychotically competitive. And then the sign of Leo is psychotically about creative self-expression. Like, I need to express myself. So Mars thrives on having challenges and Leo thrives on having a self-expression. So this can fall into weird dynamics of being competition of one-man-upship. Like that performative aspect of look how good I am. So yeah, give me more challenges so I can show you how much better I am than how you do things. So there can be this need to just outshine everybody or just to prove oneself over and over. One thing that Leo and Mars people can do with this is to get creative mastery and mastery over their own self-expression. And you can find very good performers with this combination, with a lot of mastery, very composed, very poised, so much command. So that's how it should be working itself out, not this like a weird, immature rebutting all the time. It's like the focus shouldn't be on I must be better than them. It should be more about I must become the fullest version of myself. In this way, Mars's passion and this combination is not divisive anymore. In a sense, it becomes devotional. Like if someone who is into their craft, let's say who is a performer, an entertainer, an actor, a leader, what they're doing gets a devotional slant rather than always getting into that competitive mode which with Mars is always going to be about divide and conquer, which is unhealthy. And at the end of the day, what happens when people do that? They alienate themselves. No one wants to hang around them. That tension points, that overpowering factor is just way too much to deal and handle with. And the sign of Leo, whenever there are planets in it, they risk this. This is part of Leo's quality in general. And it pushes them into isolation. I was saying earlier, that sign of Leo, when it gets flipped on its head and it's being dysfunctional, it makes the natives with whatever planet that they have withdraw. And a lot of times that have to do with other people withdrawing from them because they just can't bear that too muchness that can come out of the sign. So I'm going to leave off Mars and Leo here. This was just the basis of like, what is this combination about? I'm definitely coming back to talk about the transit of Mars through Leo, which we have to treat it a little bit differently because of just the configuration and the dynamics that are occurring simultaneously while Mars is traveling through the sign. And I am keeping my fingers crossed. If time permits, I'd like to come back and talk about Mars and Leo and all the different houses. May this season of Mars and Leo be kind to you, and may we get moving out of Cancer. Sending you much love. Till next time.